Napoleon Bonaparte had once been the master of Europe. Under his rule, the French Empire had triumphed over the continent. But after his disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812 and defeat at Leipzig in 1813, his empire crumbled. In 1814, the coalition forces of Britain, Prussia, Austria and Russia forced him to abdicate and sent him into exile on the island of Elba. Yet Napoleon's ambition burned undimmed. On March 1st, 1815, he escaped from Elba, landing in France with a small band of loyal supporters. As he marched towards Paris, his charisma and legend rallied the people to his cause. Within weeks, he was back on the throne, preparing to face the coalition armies once more. Napoleon's return threw Europe into chaos. The coalition powers acted quickly to stop him. Their plan was simple: mobilize their armies and converge on France before Napoleon could consolidate his position. The Duke of Wellington, commanding the British-led Allied forces, and Field Marshal von Blücher, leading the Prussians, coordinated their movements with precision. Both leaders recognized the threat posed by Napoleon's resurgence and agreed to unite near Brussels to confront him together. While Napoleon's strategy was simple, yet bold: divide and conquer. He aimed to strike the Allied armies separately before they could unite. On June 16th, at the Battle of Ligny, his forces defeated Blücher's Prussians, forcing them to retreat. Blücher's retreat was orderly, and his forces regrouped. Simultaneously, at Quatre, Wellington's forces managed to hold off Marshal Ney's attacks, delaying the French advance, and buying time for the coalition to prepare for the decisive battle ahead. Napoleon's army, while formidable, was not the same force that had dominated Europe a decade earlier. After the disastrous Russian campaign of 1812 and years of continuous warfare, his ranks were filled with young, inexperienced conscripts, alongside seasoned veterans of the Grand Army. By June 1815, Napoleon had assembled approximately 72,000 men, including 48,000 infantry, 14,000 cavalry and 8,000 artillery troops, supported by 250 cannons. Wellington's Allied army comprised of approximately 68,000 soldiers. Among them, nearly 50,000 were infantry, while 12,000 were cavalrymen. Supporting these troops were 150 cannons. At dawn on June 18, 1815, Napoleon's forces confronted Wellington's coalition army near the village of Waterloo, 10 miles south of Brussels. The battlefield was dominated by a ridge where Wellington had positioned his troops, and established strong points including the farmhouses of Hougoumont and La Haye-Sainte. With both armies prepared for battle, the stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of Europe. Napoleon's initial plan focused on a diversionary attack against the Allied right flank at Hougoumont, a walled farm and chateau. What began as a feint soon escalated into one of the most intense battles of the day. While the battle raged at Hougoumont, Napoleon unleashed his artillery. His Grand Battery, comprising over 80 cannons, began a relentless bombardment of Wellington's centre. The French artillery was devastating, but the soft, muddy ground absorbed much of the impact, reducing the effectiveness of the cannonballs. Wellington's troops, hidden behind the ridge, endured the bombardment with grim determination. Napoleon's next major move targeted the Allied centre, specifically the fortified farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte. Positioned on the main road, this strongpoint was defended by German troops of the King's German Legion. In a bold but disastrous move, Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, launched massive cavalry charges against Wellington's infantry. Thousands of French horsemen thundered across the muddy fields, seeking to break the Allied lines. Wellington's troops formed squares of impenetrable formation against cavalry. The French cavalry, lacking sufficient infantry or artillery support, suffered heavy losses. Ney's repeated charges drained French reserves without achieving a decisive breakthrough. By late afternoon, the first Prussian forces under the command of Field Marshal von Blücher began to arrive on the battlefield on Napoleon's right flank at Plancenoa, a small village vital to holding the French line. The Prussian army, numbering approximately 50,000 men, had been marching since dawn, moving to intercept Napoleon's forces. Meanwhile, at La Haye-Sainte, the defenders, running out of ammunition, were eventually overwhelmed in the late afternoon, allowing the French to gain a critical foothold. This victory exposed Wellington's centre, creating a dangerous gap in his lines. Blücher, with a combination of determination and strategic savvy, started to attack the French right flank at Plancenoa. The French, already heavily engaged with Wellington's forces, now found themselves caught between two fronts. The situation quickly became dire for Napoleon. To stabilize the French right and counter the pressure from the advancing forces, Napoleon committed his reserves, including experienced infantry and cavalry. Simultaneously, Wellington's troops, though battered and exhausted, began to sense an opportunity as the French lines weakened under pressure from both the British and the arriving Prussians. Wellington's army began to regroup and advance. The long-awaited Allied counterattack was now underway. Wellington, ever the tactician, ordered a general advance, launching British infantry, cavalry and artillery forward. They surged downhill while the French forces, already fatigued and disorganized, struggled to respond. In a last-ditch effort to change the course of the battle, Napoleon ordered his Imperial Guard to launch a counterattack. The Guard, renowned for their discipline, moved forward in an attempt to break the Allied lines. Their morale remained strong, even in the face of mounting challenges. However, for the first time in history, the Imperial Guard faltered. Their disciplined ranks, which once had been invincible, began to break under the weight of Allied musket fire and artillery. The charge, which had once been feared throughout Europe, was repelled with shocking force. With the Imperial Guard in retreat, the remaining French forces were left without hope. The once feared Grande Army, defeated on both sides, began to disintegrate. The retreat of the Imperial Guard was the final blow for Napoleon's forces. The French army, now utterly shattered, had no ability to resist the Allied advance. The decisive battle for Europe was over, and remnants of Napoleon's army fled the field in disarray. As the sun dipped below the horizon on June 18, 1815, the battlefield lay silent. Victory belonged to the Allies, but it came at a staggering cost. The scale of death and destruction was almost unimaginable. Over 24,000 French soldiers were killed, wounded or captured, while the Allies and Prussians suffered nearly 25,000 casualties. For Napoleon, the defeat at Waterloo was the ultimate humiliation. His once proud Grande Army dissolved into chaos, retreating in disarray towards France. Realizing that his dreams of empire were over, Napoleon abdicated on June the 22nd, just 4 days after the battle. Napoleon's second abdication marked the end of his reign. On July 15th, he surrendered to the British and was transported to the remote island of St. Helena, where he would spend the remaining 6 years of his life. The Battle of Waterloo marked the definitive end of the Napoleonic Wars and ushered in a new era of European politics. The age of Napoleon was over, but its legacy would continue to shape Europe for decades to come.